Weird point in my life where what I was doing is no longer working. I feel like I've been in Groundhog Day for like over 6 years now, and I keep coming back to the same thing, which is I should just start a YouTube channel and just start talking about my ideas. Because there was a certain point where, like, that was literally all I was doing. All I was doing was like dreaming up a life that I wanted, and part of that was actually sharing stuff that I was interested in. And I've kind of allowed my fear to keep me stuck or keep me in some weird version of being stuck that doesn't necessarily look like it did before, but it pretty much is the same. I have traveled to so many different places. I have spent weeks just like going to the mountain every day. I have tried every single holistic modality that you can think of. I have been to psychics. I have been to so many freaking doctors. And I feel like I keep coming to the same thing, that the reason I'm at this point in my life where I'm so fucking confused is probably because I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So here we go. One, when I was 19, I had started my spiritual journey. And that was the beginning of me really like starting to realize, hey, I'm really not where I'm supposed to be in my life. This is not at all what my child self had envisioned for me. Just everything was so wrong. I was studying at a university. I was studying microbiology, and I had plans to be a research scientist. And on some level, like, I still want to be a research scientist, just not microbiology. And one big thing that kept coming up when I was in school was I would see articles of people that had decided they just quit school and felt like this is what I want to do, and they just left, and I would always avoid them. Like, I had this strong aversion, like, you can't read that. Because at the time of my life, like, I wasn't paying for my school, my parents were, and they had a big rule, like, you stick to one major, you do your 4 years, and you get out, and if you can't pass it, that you pretty much are, like, weak. And I just didn't want to be that. I obviously didn't want to disappoint my parents. It just didn't seem like an option for me. So I carried on with my schools, and I kind of avoided anything like that. But by the time I was 19, so I was a sophomore at this point, so many things had happened. There were like clear warning signs of this is really not where you're supposed to be. But I just didn't know where to go. So what I started to do is I started to remember, things that I'd like to do when I was a kid. One of those things was I like to draw. And at this point in my life, I don't know when the last time I had even picked up a pencil to draw. And at the time, I was just like, I really just want to draw cartoons. Like, that would just be really cool. And I just started doing it. And at first, like, the stuff wasn't that cool. But as I began to practice, like, stuff actually started to come out. Like, I had always had this dream that I wanted to draw stuff that was, like, I just had this feeling, something's inside me, like, I could actually make original work. And eventually I ended up doing that. But I wouldn't have even started to do that if I didn't start realizing that who I wasn't me, And it made me realize that I was like, man, like, I really am this person, this whole other person inside, this person that I've always dreamt of myself of being. Like, it seems like that's possible for me. And I just started doing things where I was just like, not really giving a fuck what anyone thought of me. I mean, to some extent I probably did, but I wasn't letting that dictate my reality. I was trying new things. I was being the version of myself that I had always wanted to be. Now, eventually, by my junior year, I had so many health issues, and everything just kind of spiraled out of control. And I obviously had to leave school, and that was the end of that. But I didn't leave. Like, I didn't I mean, it was so bad. If I really talk about some of the stuff that was happening, it was a clear sign that I shouldn't have been there anymore. And I was holding so deeply onto it because I enjoyed security. I enjoyed knowing, like, hey, if I go down this path, I'm for sure going to get out with a job, right? I'm for sure going to be able to take care of myself. I'm going to have my finances in order. Like, everything's going to be good. But that didn't happen, and I was pissed because I'm like, man, I thought when you meditate and you do the spiritual work that, like, you become a better person, like everything just works out for you. I didn't realize that actually spirituality has everything to do with just getting in touch with who you are. And if you are super far from that, like I was, everything fucking explodes, right? And it was a huge explosion. Anyways, so I ended up having to move back to my house that was across the country at the time because I was going to university across the country. And that was like the worst thing for me. That was like my biggest fear, having to go back home and live with my parents. Like all of my biggest fears of like the whole reason why I went to school basically came true. And what's crazy was like I went and did it. I went to school. I'm letting you guys know that when you chase security and you have some level of self-awareness and you get into spirituality, right, it's not going to work out. Like all these things that people are telling you, like, this is the way to go. If you just listen to outside people while at the same time you're trying to get in tune with yourself, there's going to be such an eruption. There's going to be such tension because those two things can't coexist because they're different, right? What you want for your life, what your spirit wants for your life is completely different from what other people are telling you, or could be completely different from what other people are telling you you should be doing. And in my case, it was. So anyway, on the path to yourself and you avoiding your destiny, you will still have to come to it eventually. There was a point in my life where it seemed like I was good. Like a lot of my health problems had cleared up. Like it just seemed like I was on the right path to some extent. And I still kind of chose, like I was much more comfortable with shit not working out for me and kind of being miserable than I was with things working out for me and things going right. And what ended up happening was that I actually ended up creating problems for myself that ended up pushing me way back to like a level that I hadn't even seen since when I first started. So when I'm talking about levels here, this is like my own vocabulary. This isn't like a real thing. For me, what I've seen with my mental health struggle, with my spiritual journey, is like where I first started, that was like a certain level of consciousness. And then as I grow, my consciousness has grown. My personality has grown. I have grown. And so I've changed and I'm a lot more whole and I'm a lot more healed. And I can think a lot more clear. Like there's a lot of benefits just from like walking the path. When I'm talking about consciousness, I'm really talking about self-awareness, and I'm talking about the field, your energetic field. So I'm going to give like a really brief anatomy, right? If, let's say, when you first start the spiritual journey, your consciousness is at a certain level, right? And that's determined by a number of factors. I'm not going to go into that. But let's say your consciousness is this. Essentially, as you go through the path, right, as you're meditating, as you're doing yoga, as you're doing things to build your self-awareness, it no longer goes from this, it expands. What I did, my consciousness went from however much I had built it, which at this point was years. Everything that I had built had basically, I don't know if the best word is fragmented, but my access to what I had built then became about this again. So you can only imagine what happened to the rest of my body and my mentality and my life. It was like night and day. I went from like being happy to no reason to just like really, really struggling. Like just getting up out of bed was a struggle. And I had forgotten, it had been so many years that I had forgotten what that was even like. And that was tough. That was tough. But what, you know what I learned? I learned that I was like, wow, I avoided again another opportunity to really like do what I actually want to do. But because I'm too afraid, because I'm too afraid to see like what's on the other side, I went back. And in that whole process, what I actually ended up realizing was I actually had a lot more compassion for myself when I was going through the process of like building my consciousness up again, building a better foundation for my mental health, right? I had to go back to the foundation. I had to really this time around like really learn what are the things that are actually helping my mental health. What are the things that are actually pivotal to me getting better. So that was really interesting. And I was able to see that like this process of going from, completely hating yourself to a better version of yourself that has more self-trust, that has more self-love, that you're able to manifest a lot more. That's such a process, and there's phases. I just felt like I was so hard on myself the first time around, and when I came back the second round, because I knew what it was like to be on the other side, I had so much compassion for the fact that I'm like, no, it makes sense. It makes sense that I'm not doing well right now, right? It makes sense, like, where I'm at right now. And it also makes sense that, like, why I went backwards. And so that was really, I think, kind of healing, just in the sense to be able to do it all over again. I constantly realized, like, I can keep going on this hamster wheel for as long as I want. All of the fears that I have, right? Like all the ways that I feel about myself that aren't the greatest feelings, right? The insecure part of me, that's always going to be there, right? Like I'm never going to hit a point where all of that is just cleared up and I'm just good. I don't want to say like speak that in reality and be like, I'm never going to hit that point. I'm obviously always going to try and reach for a better version of myself. And I'm always trying to get to a point where it's like, I feel clear-headed, where I don't even need to have thoughts. The thoughts come up and I let them go. I realized that I had gotten so hyper-focused in the details that I wasn't seeing the bigger picture at one point. I had taught myself psychology, I think really to just like put the blame on somebody else. And I got so focused on what messed me up, pointing the finger essentially, that I lost focus in the fact that I had the power to change my life. Playing the victim or playing this like nothing ever works out for me, my life just sucks, like I just keep hitting like rock bottom, or it just, like constantly telling myself that I can't imagine that like one day everything's just gonna be perfect, right? Like, oh my God, I just hit like the lottery or something, like all these randomly good things started happening to me. Like, I don't think that there's a possibility, or if there is, it's really low, of that happening if I have this mentality where I'm like, it's not gonna happen for me. So I did eventually just kind of hit a switch where I go like, you know what? I'm gonna fake it, right? I'm just gonna fake tell myself that like things will eventually work out, because I don't want to live the rest of my life like that. Let's say, like I still have so much more life to live, and even if I don't, like if my last day is tomorrow, I don't want to think like that. What is the point? There gets to a certain point, I think, in the journey where it is possible to just choose better thoughts. I think in the earlier stages, it's a lot more difficult. There's a lot more like needing to train yourself to actually think better thoughts. But then I think it gets to a certain point where, at least for me, that I started realizing like, hey, you know what? I'm a big part of why my life doesn't look the way that I want it to look, right? I make choices in my life that are not going to help me get where I want to be. And I think another big one is that I didn't really have a dream for myself, right? I just constantly lived life where I'm like, I have these huge dreams and I want them, but at the same time, I'm telling myself like, that's not really possible for me. And now I'm just kind of like, you know what? It might be. I don't know. I'd rather be in the state of maybe than in a state of like, it's not going to happen for me. Because me being in a state of it's not going to happen for me, it's not going to happen for me. Right. But if I'm in a state of like maybe, that's a little bit better. Right. I found a lot more value in things actually not working out for me. And this is what I mean by that. There was a certain point in my life where, for years, I just had to put in a little bit of effort and things worked out for me. A lot of things. And I think that was kind of like my problem in life. I just thought like that's how life was, right? Like you just put in a little bit of effort and you get what you want. And I didn't realize that on some level I kind of had it a little too easy. And so when I had this contrast, when everything fell apart, it fell apart at my peak and I fell down, it was hard. I continued to get up. But it was tough just to realize like I could put in effort and nothing could come from that. Or not nothing, but like major sex wouldn't happen. And what ended up happening was that this other person started to develop, right? This person who had a lot more balanced personality. Someone who realized that like, hey, there are people out here who are struggling, and I was able to really see and understand people who were suffering greatly, who had similar problems to me, but had had them for a lot longer, right? People who had been trying for years and years to get up from where they were at and couldn't. And it wasn't because they weren't trying, right? It came to a number of other factors. And I started to kind of build this small little community as I moved through my life. I met people that I probably would have never met, would have never even thought of meeting had I not had all those struggles happen to me. And so what I mean by that, let's give an example. There was a time period in my life where my best friend was 65 years old. And at the time I was like 21. I was in my early 20s. And we were genuinely friends. I went to her house and we had deep conversations. It was fulfilling. And had I stayed in school, had I stayed being the person that I was, her and I would have never had a conversation. Had I never had all this stuff, like all my health problems happen to me, her and I would have probably like never even met. We would never even attract each other because we wouldn't really have that much in common. When I like really, really suffered in my life, I feel like this whole other world opened up to me that I didn't even know was possible. And like I have tears in my eyes because it really means that much to me. That sometimes not getting what you want is getting closer to what you actually need. And I think of my life, and even though it's not necessarily where I want it to be, I do like who I am as a person a lot more, not just because I worked at it to build this version of myself, but because I actually know myself. To a certain extent, I know myself. And it becomes really obvious when I have conversations with people my age and there's a disconnect because I just feel like it's like I can't do this. I'd rather have a conversation with somebody who knows themselves a lot better. And not to say that I don't do it, and not to say that I'm like super judgmental about it, because I feel like I'm coming off like that. I think what I'm talking about is like intimacy. That I'm able to have some level of intimacy with other people that I, prior in my life, could not have, wasn't even close to having, didn't even know it existed. And so I am very, very proud of the work that I put in, that I'm able to have that. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.